Another awesome stream, another fun time. We all get to learn something. I'm going to change things up a little bit today. So I'm going to basically do a master class on a song that we mastered last week. And the artist, which I know is joining us here, is Simon here too? Let's see. Is there an imprenta fragante in the room? If he's here, awesome. If he's not, he probably will be at some point. But basically, I know Dustin and or Ellie are here. They go under Modern Temple. So the track was produced by Simon, who goes by Imprenta Fragante, and then Modern Temple is also featured on this song as well. I believe it's part of their project, but Simon has a verse, and then Ellie's singing the chorus. Dustin has, I believe, one or two verses. Yeah, he has two verses on here. But super awesome song, amazing production that Simon put together for this. They're just a great team. I really hope you all do more music together. But basically, yeah, I want to deconstruct the mastering for this song because, the work is already done. So it's a good opportunity for us to kind of see how it was done. That way we can hear the mastered version. We can hear the producer's mix as well. And then we can kind of like see how we got from one point to the next. So I'm definitely excited to show everybody this. And let me just double check to make sure, yep, I got everything recording. As always, this will be put up as an archive on the Colormon YouTube channel. So if you haven't subscribed to that, subscribe to it, please. And also, we'll be posting more things about future streams on my Instagram. So let's get started. As always, if there's any questions, you're all welcome to chime in on the chat. Corey will give me a heads up if anybody says anything. Let me take a drink of my water here. We were getting camera things together today and had a few hiccups, but we're going to have everything together with the new camera setup in the next stream. Anyone that has experience, by the way, using a DSL camera with streaming, if there's any of you out there, hit me up after the stream. I got questions. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. So, yeah, the song is called Unstoppable. It is an upcoming release by Modern Temple and Imprenta Fragante. And let's go ahead and take a look here at the session, okay? We have the producer mix up here at the top. I actually have this is actually a master that I was referencing that I did as sort of a first pass, sent it to the producer, sent it to Simon, and then he gave me some feedback. So what I generally do, and this might help some of you in some of your endeavors, is when I get notes from people, I will import that mix into my session, and then I will A/B between that mix and the current session where I'm making the changes. So that way I can listen and make sure that I'm actually making improvements. So for example, a couple of the notes that Simon gave me on the first round was he wanted to hear. There were a couple comments about vocal levels. So there was a comment about the drums needing to be a little punchier overall. And there were a couple more comments. But in general, that allows me, when I import that mix into my session, I can make my improvements and then go, oh, okay, let me now listen to what I had. And if the drums are punchier in relation to what I had, then I know that I'm making improvements. So it's way better than just kind of like guessing and hoping that it's better and then, sending it off and hoping and praying that you made the right decision. So, just a way to keep yourself in check. So definitely something cool that I do. So we'll take a listen to the producer mix, which you can see looks like there's not a whole lot of limiting going on here. And then what we'll do is we'll listen to the mastered mix. Actually, what we'll do is just to kind of introduce everybody to the song, we'll listen to the mastered mix first, because then what I'm going to do is gain match it to the producer mix. So before we get started too, let's just kind of look at what we're dealing with here. And this is a little bit of insight into my process as well, because I was given 3 stems for this. This is a stem mastering project. So for those of you that are not familiar with that, it means that we're working with groups of instruments, as opposed to, if you're mixing, you have all the individual tracks, right? You got your kick layers, you have your snare layers all individually tracked out, you have your individual toms, you have your individual hi-hat, and you have your individual basses, your individual synths, right? But in this case, we have just a drum stem, and then we have, now, so let me just kind of make this easier visually for everybody. Let me just group these really quick. This will help us. So basically, we had a drum stem sent to us. We have a music stem with no drums, right? And then we have the acapella, okay? Now, the acapella, the music with no drums, and the drums, when I play them together, when I hit play, I hear the producer mix, which is basically what I have up here at the top. Now, what I did, which was part of my process of getting things to be a little bit more balanced between sections, is we have things that I sort of chopped up depending on the section I was working on. And then we can see that I didn't do any of this with the music, but then with the vocals, we have 3 singers on this song. We have Dustin, we have Ellie, and we have Simon. So they're all doing their thing. You know, there's different sounds for each voice, things to maybe balance out. And we have, that's the reason why I split these up the way that I did. So we'll get more into the processing and everything, but let's go ahead and take a listen to the track. So this is Unstoppable by Modern Temple and Imprenta Fragante. I didn't do a sound check yet, but hopefully everything plays through. If not, please let me know, and we'll take care of it. Here we go.
With open eyes and an open heart, I realize it is just a start. I feel it is time to begin. The wait is done, time to commit. Everything is gonna be alright. Everything is coming to the light. Reach out and take it. Even if I'm up against a giant, or I'm in the middle of the den with the lions, I'll make it. Out of my mind, I will rise and look past the lies to say I have a dream that you placed inside of me. I choose to believe that it's possible. And when I'm weak, you will fight for me. I choose to believe you're unstoppable. You're unstoppable. Eyesight zoomed into a lamp upon my feet. Nearsighted, far-sighted, blurred lines in between. You see the motion picture, but I only see the scene. My comfort is confronting my trustability. Think I'm 1,000 miles away, lost at sea, but in actuality I am right upon the beach. Instead of seeking after the future, asking what will send my way, I let the potter mold exactly what he wants to with this day. Out of my mind, I will rise and look past the lies to say I have a dream that you placed inside of me. I choose to believe that it's possible. And when I'm weak, you will fight for me. I choose to believe you're unstoppable. You're unstoppable.
Mira que ya yo lo presiento. Es una aventura y toca darle tiempo, yeah. Y ahora es el momento para darlo todo y nadar en contra de la marea. Posiblemente titubea y el man no le crea y se arme la pelea. Lo vea aunque no lo vea. No hay lugar en dudar because you say, hey, come back on my way, hey, you will be okay, hey, cause it's possible. Because you say, hey, come back on my way, hey, you will be okay, hey, you're unstoppable.
I have a dream that you placed inside of me. I choose to believe that it's possible. And when I'm weak, you will fight for me. I choose to believe you're unstoppable. You're unstoppable. You're unstoppable.
Yeah, that is an amazing production by Simon. Amazing writing, performing by all three of them. By Ellie, by Dustin, by Simon. Yeah, so super, super killer production. And that was basically the final master. Now, there was some audio glitching going on there. I apologize. I'll have to explore what's going on with that a little bit later. But basically, I hope you got the point. What I want to do now is I'm going to play you the producer mix, okay? So I'll play you just kind of a little bit of that, and let's hear how they sound different from each other. So obviously we got a little volume change here.
With open eyes and an open heart, I realize it is just the start. I feel it is time to begin. The wait is done, time to commit. Everything is gonna be alright. Everything is coming to the light. Reach out and take it, even if I'm up against a giant, or I'm in the middle of the den with the lions.
So I'm gonna jump to the chorus really quick and just listen.
I have a dream that you placed inside of me. I choose to believe it.
Now, if I go to my mix now, if I go to my master, and I'm actually going to gain match it here. That's why I have this plugin right there. And let's hear a gain match version of the chorus in the mastered version.
I have a dream that you placed inside of me. I choose to believe that it's possible. And when
Okay, now listen to the producer mix again.
I have a dream that you placed inside of me. I choose to believe that it's possible.
And one more time on the mastered version.
I have a dream that you placed inside of me. I choose to believe that it's possible. And when I'm weak.
So I don't know if you guys can hear the difference there. Basically, to me at least, right, the difference is sort of there's like a glue there that is that sort of brings everything together, right? That term glue is used a lot in audio, especially with certain types of compressors and things like that. But there is a cohesiveness there that I feel like was achieved pretty well with a lot of the processing that we're going to talk about. But there was also some things about the producer mix that I thought needed a little bit of balancing. So, for example, if we listen to Dustin's verse, okay, and I'm going to jump to Simon's verse, okay, I want you to hear the difference in vocal level and listen to the difference in how the drums are hitting. So here's Dustin's verse.
Wait is done, time to commit. Everything is gonna be alright. Everything is coming to the light. Reach out and take it, even if I'm up against a giant, or I'm in the middle of the den with the lions. I'll make it.
Okay, and then we have Simon's verse.
Del man no le crea y se arme la pelea. Lo vea aunque no lo vea. No hay lugar en dudar because you say, hey, come back on my way. You will be okay. 'Cause it's possible.
So again, Dustin's verse.
Wait is done, time to commit. Everything is gonna be alright. Everything is coming to the light. Reach out and take it, even if I'm up against a giant.
So it's the thing is, Simon's mix is awesome, and I want to make sure that I'm clear on that, right? Simon's mix is really good. The detail, right? When we talk about that 10 to 15% that takes it from where it's at to being done, is what we're doing many times in mastering. It's not all the time. Sometimes we're taking it from. It's a 50% difference. It's like a major difference. Sometimes it's a very minor difference. And in this case, we have a great mix, but there's just some inconsistencies that I want to address, and then just sort of an overall glue that I'm applying to the whole track. So now listen to the way that Dustin's verse and Simon's verse sound in the master. Remember, this is gain matched, so it's a little quieter. So here's Dustin's verse.
I realize it is just the start. I feel it is time to begin. The wait is done, time to commit. Everything is gonna be alright. Everything is coming to the light.
And then here's Simon's verse.
Darlo todo y nadar en contra de la marea. Posiblemente titubea. Del man no le crea y se arme la pelea. Lo vea aunque no lo vea. No hay lugar en dudar because you say.
So there's a little bit more consistency in terms of the way the drums are hitting, because we have two very different styles in these sections, right? You have more of a pop feel in Dustin's verse. You have more of a reggaeton feel in Simon's verse. So there's different drums in the production. And then the voices are different as well. So Simon was the one that actually mixed it, the producer. And he did a fantastic job on this. When he sent me the mix, I was like, I was really, really proud of how far he's come. Simon was actually one of my students, and he's come such a long way. But the point is that this is a difficult thing when it comes to mixing, because consistency from section to section, especially when he's changing up styles and singers, like that's hard. Okay, so the details that to me make things more balanced were one of the things that I wanted to address. So let's kind of talk about that. Now Ellie she's singing on the chorus. The drums were pretty consistent from chorus to chorus. I didn't really find anything there, but yet that's a third voice that we have to consider in this sort of overall balance within the production. Now, it's funny because I said to Simon, I was like, I think your voice is louder in the producer mix than the other two, and I was kind of like, you mix the track, dude, your voice is louder. Because that's, they always have that joke, the guitar player makes a guitar heavy mix, drummer makes a drum heavy mix. But either way, I pointed that out to him, and he was like, oh, you know what, I didn't quite hear that. So the one of the goals was to sort of balance out the volume as well as the EQ. So Dustin's voice naturally has a little bit more of that high mid-range. Simon likes his vocals to be a little brighter, just from previous projects I've worked on with him. So there's got to be this balance, right? Something that makes, you don't want one vocal sounding more nasally or more thin and another vocal sounding more warm and potentially more present. So balance, okay? Now the answer to that when it comes to working with an a cappella, and whether you're doing this on your own projects that you're mixing or whether you're doing stem mastering yourself, is by treating these sections differently. I think one of the things that I could do that would hurt me or be counterproductive would be to just slap processing on the whole a cappella in hopes of correcting everything as a whole. So, for example, if I felt like Dustin's voice had maybe a little too much high mid, but Simon's voice didn't, or Ellie's voice didn't, I may choose to use some type of dynamic processing like multi-band compression, but just in that high mid-range in hopes that it'll just catch the parts that Dustin's doing and not work as hard in the sections where Ellie and Simon are doing what they do. And that could potentially hurt those vocals because I'm putting one processor across the whole a cappella. So again, the answer to that is to break these things out so that I have Dustin's voice on one track, Ellie's voice on another, and then Simon's voice on another. Simple, right? I can treat each one independently for the most part, right? You still have background vocals. If there's decay from one line into a section, you're going to get a little bit of that. But small. That's a small concern of mine, barely a concern at all. Additionally, consistency in the drums, right? As I said, we have the verses that have more sort of a pop feel. We have the reggaeton feel in Simon's section. There's even like a breakdown where there's snaps. Actually, I think it's more of a distant clap kind of sound. And then you have the sort of bigger, heavier, sort of the larger pop drums happening in the chorus. So all these things, in my opinion, need a little bit of this balance. So I broke them all up so that way what originally was one drum stem, one file, is now different tracks for different levels of control. And as I said, I didn't feel like that was necessary in the music, right? Everything but the drums, but the vocals is here in this stem. So yeah, this is basically what we're looking at. And this project was very interesting to me because I kind of just went with my gut on it. I wasn't using any references, but I might have been listening to some other stuff that I've mastered in the past, but I didn't have any concrete references for this project. But the goal was just to make it, okay, we want to get that loudness. We want to get that big sound. And a lot of it I relied on the feedback from the producer because he wants to feel what he wants to feel, and his feedback was exactly what was needed after the first mix was sent to him. So let's talk about a couple of those things. Okay, so when I sent him the first mix, like I said, one of the things he commented on was the drums. He wanted the drums to be more punchy, and that's something that we struggle with whenever we make masters that are really loud. I mean, this master is sitting somewhere between like -7 and -6, so it's loud. And you're going to lose a lot of that punch because we are going to reduce those peaks in order to get that loudness. And those peaks many times give us that punch, which is why asking for a drum stem is going to allow you to overcome that a little bit, to add some of that punch back into it. So let's first look at the verse drums. Okay, now you're going to see me in this project doing a lot with EQ. You always see me working with EQ a lot. I think it's one of the most powerful things that we have in sort of our arsenal of mixing. These look like to be, there was less work done on these drums, just a little bit of high mids. That's all that was. So listening to the difference between the drums with and without the EQ, it's minor. This is with the EQ, without it. With it, without it. It's so subtle. It's just a little bit of edge, that 3.5K or so, just a little bit of edge, but look at how much we're taking out. It's not even a dB and a half. So it's just enough to make room for maybe other things that are up there like vocals, but barely anything done to those. So these drums were pretty simple, and this is actually something left over from before I split out the drums into different parts. So then we have Simon's drums. Okay, so let's look at the EQ first here. So we have some control on the low end. Look at that, not even a dB taken out. But the idea here is that we're doing it at the very, very low frequency because we're not trying to just cut off a bunch of low frequencies because that's going to make the drums very thin. Now the idea here is that we're controlling this low end, and many times you're going to do this towards the end of the mastering where you're trying to get things louder, you're trying to squeeze out like that last dB of loudness. And the low end is many times the culprit in the difference between a cleaner, louder master versus a sort of dirtier, hitting a little bit harder, hearing the limiter type of mastering. So, that low end roll off is a very, very fine, subtle thing, fine-tuned, subtle thing that is just helping us, potentially at least, just balance the low end a little bit better to the sub bass and the things happening in the instruments, and also allowing us to get a little bit more out of that master. Now, I love adding mid-range. You've seen me do this all the time, but remember, a little bit goes a long way. So we have a little bump in the mids here, about 1K, 1.5K, and then we have a little bit of that harshness rolled off right here. So nothing's happening on this EQ, nothing's happening with this console emulation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bypass this EQ so we can hear the difference. And yeah, I'm sitting here turning it on and off, and honestly, I'm barely hearing anything. It's just that subtle. Yeah, I was making sure I'm on the right track. That happens too. But yeah, it's barely anything, and it's just enough to where if I didn't do it, would it have made a big difference? Probably not. But yeah, that's definitely, we're talking subtleties at this point, right? Subtleties in the mid-range on this, subtleties both adding and controlling those high mids on that as well as the low end. Now this is what gave us the punch. This is an amazing plugin, transient master. In fact, I'll just put these together so that way I can bypass them all at once. So here's, so I'm going to turn off both of these. Start over again. Off. Just adding a little bit of that punch. That's all it's doing. It's not something crazy reinventing the wheel here. Remember, the goal in mastering is not to change the mix, right? We're talking about basically Simon had his mix, and he just wants to hear a better version of that mix. He doesn't want me to remix his song. He doesn't want me to fix his song. There's nothing that needed fixing. But we have to understand that once things get loud, when we start adding, I mean, where are we at here? We had to take away to gain match this 8 dB. Yeah, just double checking there. 8 dB of volume is a lot of volume. That's a lot of limiting and compression, a little bit of compression, more limiting, that needs to happen in order to achieve that. And we lose things and we gain artifacts as a result of that. We lose punch and we gain harshness. We gain anything that was potentially imbalanced in frequency response between instruments. Like all that stuff comes to the forefront. As I've mentioned in other streams before, it's like putting a microscope onto the project. So a lot of that stuff becomes exposed. And that's why we're doing a lot of what we're doing. So Simon's comment about things being punchier, it's because he missed the punchiness from his mix. So what did I do when he sent me the first set of notes? I listened to his mix, gain matched the master down. That way all the loudness was sort of taken out of the equation, right? And I A-B'd between his mix and the master. So that way I could get a better feel for and actually I'll give you sort of a little insight here into the first mix that I sent him. I want you to hear how it wasn't as punchy. Okay, so here's the producer mix. And then here's my first master. And here's the current master. So previous master. Current master. Right? So you might be saying to yourself, like, well, the first master does sound punchy. And that's the thing. It's a different kind of punch. It's fatter punchiness, which when you listen to the producer mix, the punch isn't in the bottom end. The punch is in the mid-range. And that's what was missing. So by adding this transient master, this is giving us that punch, that kind of punch, not like the fatness that I want from a rock kick or something like that, or an 808 or something. But yeah, so that's kind of what's going on here. Is there's a psychology to this where when he tells me that the master isn't punchy enough, I want to listen to what his mix sounded previously, gain matched, right? Because we want to eliminate that loudness factor. And that allows me to listen and go, oh, okay, so he wants to hear that. So at least lean it more towards what he was looking for. And again, like the verse drums barely had to do anything. And we're going to find out that a lot of the difference between the master and the pre-master is going to come from the stereo processing that happens not on the individual stems, but more on, the overall song as a whole. So we're going to see that. So let's just take a look real quick at the chorus drums. Let's see if there are any kind of major twists and turns here, which there's not. Look, I mean, we have a little bit of high mids taken out of that, and then we did add transient master. Now this was more substantial because I do recall in his, when he made those notes, I listened to the chorus and I was like, yeah, it is lacking a little bit in the punch. And furthermore, the consistency that I'm talking about from section to section, right? From verse to chorus, Simon's verse, kind of a different genre, and then to the the last chorus, like that consistency. I think some of that what happened there? Looks like transient master glitched on me. Let me just reload the session really quick. But yeah, so basically that inconsistency. Let me just don't save that. Give me a second here. Yeah, so that those consistencies I'm talking about, some of that came from just creating that consistency of punch. Okay, so it's just listening. What is the punchiest drum in this situation? Okay, it's the verse drums. All right, let me use that as sort of a template, and then listen to the other section. Just make sure it's got that little transient, and that's what I noticed was the difference. All right, looks like the session's loaded back up. Give a second here. Ableton is doing a lot of work today, apparently. Had a long weekend. It's tired. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to put my, let me put my gain matching back in here, just in case we need it. I think I actually bumped this up to -7. And there we go. Cool. Okay, so let's see. As I was saying with the Transient Designer, I guess it's called, yeah, it's Transient Master. There's some iterations of this plugin that are also called Transient Designer. But yeah, you can see the attack on there is pretty heavy, 41%. So let's hear the difference with it and without it. And again, we have just a little bit of high mids taken off using the Slate EQ. So I'm going to put these two together. And let's hear it with and without. So here's without the original. Okay, with it on. Off. Here, it's good. It's off. On. So it's not night and day, right? And I think it is, again, that difference between that sort of fatter punch, because when it's off, it's not like it's bad. It doesn't lack punch, but it's just a different punch. So again, this just seemed to be the answer to give me that punch that the producer was looking more for overall. And you know, when it comes to loudness and punch, I think that the kind of punch that we need to cut through the loudness normally is in the form of this more transient kind of attack. And we find that everywhere. I mean, if we look at our limiters and you look at if you look at, for example, Ozone 9, or you look at Fab Filter, I mean, Fab Filter I think has a variable attack time, but if you look at this, we have this transient emphasis. That's exactly what it is. You turn it on, you turn it up, and you start getting more of that punch. I chose to do that on the drums specifically because I didn't necessarily want to put it on the entire master as a whole, because that will affect other things like the vocals and the music. So I had the flexibility, the freedom to do it to the drums. I chose to do that instead. And I think something that's really important to notice up to this point is that we haven't transformed the mix. The goal of stem mastering many times is not, and mastering in general, is not to transform the mix. We just want to give them a better version. And with these drums, we're really just trying to give him a louder, or them I should say, a louder version of their pre-master. So let's so we looked at the drums. Not a whole lot going on there. Like I said, we're not reinventing the wheel. In terms of music, I didn't do anything. Look, music is untouched. Okay, let's look at the instrumental. Okay, so we have stuff on the instrumental. Looks like I had some things here that I undid. But if we look at the EQ, now this was something that I thought was super, super cool, and sort of this glue that I'm talking about. This was something that I sort of second guessed at first. I thought, yeah, I don't know if they're gonna like this, but I went with my gut, and it ended up working out really well. But I want to take off this EQ, and I want you to hear what the instrumental sounds like with it and without it. So here's without the EQ, or I'm sorry, let's listen to it with the EQ first. Let's jump to the verse here. Okay, and here's off. Let's go back to the beginning. So it's off currently. On. Now I'm going to turn this up so you can hear what it's adding. so I put it back. Let's go to the chorus. All right, so I'm gonna turn this up. Okay, so that's where it is for the mastering. So here's without the EQ. Here's with it. Now, again, not night and day, right? But when I boost this, you hear the low-mid area of the frequency spectrum that I'm adding. That, to me, there's something interesting about that, especially in this project. It seems that it was a good choice to sort of bring everything forward. And I use this term many times, frequency balancing. So balancing between the instruments and the drums and the vocals. This seemed to be sort of the magic frequency for this production that really helped bring this particular set, or in this case, the instrumental, just sort of helped give it dimension without making it sound too muddy, without changing the mix. Because, I mean, if we add a ton of this frequency, right, we get more guitars, potentially the drums feel a little muddy. Things change, right? The mix changes. But there's a point where we can add something and it just adds something nice without necessarily changing the vibe. Remember, many times, like with drums being punchy, we are sort of changing the vibe a little bit. More so because we're trying to counter the loudness. We're trying to get the vibe back, so to speak. But in this case, we're actually trying to add something that is going to hopefully feel sonically more pleasing. It's appropriate for the song, for the genre, for the arrangement. It just works. I could easily do something that would sound not appropriate, right? If I added a bunch of 60 hertz, right? It might make the kick be too punchy. It might make everything just kind of feel a little awkward because there's too much energy on the low end. This just seemed to work. Why did I pick this frequency? 487 hertz? I don't know. I'm almost positive the way I approached this, which if you've seen me work before, was I just dialed in something, I boosted the frequency, and then I swept a little bit to find something that wasn't bringing out anything that was negative, right? I'm not trying to bring out any harshness. I'm just trying to bring out something that's pleasing. So I don't have any formula for that, and that's the thing that I wish I had for you, but I don't. I'm just kind of going off of feel. It could always be something that gets dialed back. It's just happened in a mix today where I was doing a very similar thing, but to a mix, to a specific, it was a vocal chop, or it was a piano actually. And one of the notes from the producer was like, the piano feels a little muddy. So did too much. So I had to pull some of that back. So it doesn't always work, but fortunately, I think this worked well. Now, also understand that this is after we made the drums punchier, after we balanced some of that mid-range back that I showed you, a little bit of that 3K, bringing it down. This is all just adding to that frequency balance overall. All right, so let's jump into what's going on with the vocals, and then we'll talk about the master chain as well. So Dustin's vocal. Now, Dustin's voice naturally has more high mids in it. This is probably going to be more obvious, I think, because you can see I'm taming some of the high mids. Okay, am I adding any of this? Yeah, I'm adding like a half a dB of this sort of tone, which is about the 1K range, and then I'm adding some warmth with a shelving EQ of all things, not a bell, but yeah, we're at about 130 hertz. I'm adding that for warmth. So let's hear what his voice sounds like. Yes, Dustin, I'm going to solo your vocal. Sorry. It's a great vocal though. Okay, so here's with the EQ on. Actually, let's turn it off. So here's with the EQ off.
Open eyes and an open heart. I realize it is just a start. I feel it is time to begin. The wait is done, time to commit.
EQ on.
Open eyes and an open heart. I realize it is just a start. I feel it is time to begin. The wait is done, time to commit.
Off.
Open eyes and an open heart. I realize it is just a start.
On.
Open eyes and an open heart. I realize it is just a start.
So maybe you hear him feel a little bit more forward, and that's because I'm bringing those lows out a little bit. And that's because Ellie's voice, Simon's voice, they all have that sort of low, a little bit of low presence there. So I'm trying to balance Dustin's voice with them without trying to change the feel of his voice. If I take too much of this 1K out, I'll actually make him feel more distant because that's part of his voice. So you have to listen and make sure that you want to make sure that you're not getting rid of the presence in the voice by taking too much of this mid-range out. So remember, 3K, that's like bite. That's not necessarily tone. That's where things start to kind of tickle the eardrums a little bit. So you want to balance that back so that way you're not making things too harsh. And then this stuff here is like, it's right on that borderline of tone and edge and sort of boxiness a little bit. So I'm bringing it up, a half a dB. It's like just enough to feel it. So that's what's happening there. So we got sort of the low, the beef. We have the 1K, which is like the tone and some of the natural presence of the voice. And then we're bringing back some of the harshness with 3K. So another mix, another production, none of that might have been done, but we're dealing with 3 different vocals. So that consistency, this is part of my sort of interpretation of how these vocals should sound uniformly. I think that's a word. So Ellie's voice.
I have a dream that you placed inside of me.
So then we go to Dustin's voice. It should sound fairly similar in terms of sonic quality.
I realize it is just a start. I feel it is time to begin.
Right, and then her voice.
Oh, 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 no.
So when I'm talking about sonic consistency, I'm talking about one voice isn't sounding thinner or more harsh than the other. That's what I'm getting at. So obviously their voices are going to sound different. There's different effects going on. We're not going to change that. But let's look at what we did for Ellie's voice. Okay, so we're actually, now this might confuse you a little bit because I'm using this high mid band here on sort of the low mid frequency. So I apologize for that. But that's actually adding more of the warmth of the voice, not necessarily low. Yeah, let's pick this apart a little bit. So without this EQ, this is what it sounds like.
Place inside of me. I choose to believe that it's possible. Place inside of me. I choose to believe that it's possible.
And here's with it on.
And when I'm weak, you will fight for me. I choose to believe you're unstoppable.
Here's off.
You're unstoppable. Whoa, 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 whoa,
on.
Oh, no.
So I know hopefully that's happening quickly enough, or I should say in a good enough amount of time for you to hear the difference, but I understand that I'm working a little quickly. But the idea here, and I'll point out all these frequency bands to you. Let's talk about this first one here. So again, this is way down at like 350. I'm going to boost it so you can hear what exactly I'm adding to her voice.
I have a dream that you placed inside of me. I choose to believe that it's possible.
Right? So the difference between where we were at beforehand, this is like with no EQ.
I have a dream that you placed inside of me.
This is with it.
I choose to believe that it's possible.
Right? It's barely anything. It's not like some crazy change in her voice. But you can hear when I add too much of it, that's sort of almost the muddy part of the vocal. But when you add just enough, you just get dimension and you get a little bit of proximity, a little bit of that she feels closer. So there's a lot of things that are happening just with that little, how many dB? Less than a dB and a half, right? We're getting dimension in the voice, so she's feeling closer. We're getting frequency balance between the other vocals, so I'm using it to help them feel more consistent. And probably just adding a little bit of warmth to her in general, just so she's more kind of glued to the track. Okay, so then we have this range here. This 1K, as I said, I added that to Dustin's voice. So we're just balancing frequencies. In this case, I'm pulling it back a little bit. So let me zero it out. First, here's with the EQ on, just with this band on.
I have a dream that you placed inside of me.
Here's where it was.
I have a dream that you placed inside of me.
Here's where it is.
I have a dream that you placed inside of me.
Now let me boost it so you can hear what I'm taking a little out.
I have a dream that you placed inside of me. I choose to believe that it's possible.
So you hear that edge, right? When I push it too much, it starts getting too nasally. That's actually a very prominent sound in Dustin's voice, I've noticed, which is his voice just naturally cuts through, which is awesome. And I emphasized a little bit of that in his voice as well. But with hers, I had to balance it back just to, again, balancing frequencies between the three vocals, but also to help balance that edge in her voice a little bit. This is actually a pretty, I think the whole like 700 to 1.5K sort of range is really cool just to give certain instruments presence. It's just, if you do too much of it, you get a little edgy. But if you do just enough of it, you could actually bring things sort of forward. It's actually more of a focus, not really a bringing it forward in the mix, but giving it focus, if that makes sense. All right, and then we have this sort of low stuff here, which, as I mentioned earlier with Dustin, I added some to bring him forward. She already had enough lows, so I'm pulling it back to balance it. And also, I mean, we got a lot going on in the track. Listen to how, like, you know, the drums are super fat. Listen.
I have a dream that you placed inside of me.
Right? I can't add a bunch of this because you got the drums, the guitars are super fat, right? If I boost this, listen what happens.
I have a dream that you placed inside of me. I choose to believe that it's possible. I have a dream that you placed inside of me.
Right? I'll boost it again.
I have a dream that you placed inside of me.
Right? When it's boosted, you can hear that it's kind of mushing together with everything. She feels super forward, right? Because it's that proximity that we get when we get closer to something naturally with our voice. But it's also bad for the arrangement. So when it's just balanced in the right place, her voice doesn't sound too thin, and it just kind of melts into the track, and that's really the goal. If I pull it back too much, we get this.
I have a dream that you placed inside of me. I choose to believe that it's possible. And when I'm weak, you will fight for me. I choose to believe you're unstoppable.
Right, versus where it is here.
I have a dream that you placed inside of me.
And I don't know if you can hear that, but when I pull that frequency back, her voice gets thin. And a little bit of it is subjective. Like, some people might prefer that in the mix or in the mastering. But for me, I'm looking more for natural as opposed to aggressively this or that. So I think it was a good natural balance there. All right, let's talk about Simon, Imprenta Fragante. So Simon's voice is he has natural presence. Okay, it's just how he is. He has a really great sonic quality to his voice, and when we listen to that, let's take a listen to him, just a cappella here.
Mira que ya yo lo presiento, es una aventura y toca darle tiempo, yeah. Y ahora es el momento para darlo todo y nadar en contra de la marea. Por si la mente titubea, mi alma no le crea.
So there's not a ton that I had to do with the EQ. You can see, and now that what I've spoken about, we can apply that here, right? We have this range, which is, again, that sort of, if we push it too much, it gets muddy. But if we do it just enough, we get a little bit of just warmth out of the voice. We're balancing back those low frequencies here, not making it too thin, but also keeping it natural, right? Not too muddy, not too thin, but just in the middle, which gives us natural for both the arrangement and for the sound of his voice. And then we have that edge right here that's being pulled back, that 3K. Now this up here is to balance some of those like really high frequencies that we get sometimes with our S's. We don't always have to use a de-esser, and I do want to emphasize that point. A lot of times people just slap de-essers on there because there's like, yeah, it's too bright, there's too many S's. You can just try a shelf. Just use a shelving EQ and just roll off some of the high end until the voice controls that frequency range, but just doesn't get too dull. Okay? And we can just kind of apply everything that I just spoke of with the other vocals here, and just understand that it was meant for balancing between the three voices and also to keep the vocal feeling natural, right? Not losing any impact from that voice. Yeah, so I mean, that shows you sort of the details that are happening within the drums, within the vocals, and then, as I said, we had that one EQ on the whole instrumental to kind of give it a little bit of added dimension, right? That's the one that I spoke of right here. I just love doing this stuff. So yeah, what's the frequency here? 4, but in between 4 and 500 hertz. So let's talk about this. Now, this is probably the most of the change of sound that we're looking at here, right? We have our limiters. So we have Ozone 9. We have not 1 but 2 limiters. For those of you that have seen me work before, you know that I'm all about using 2 limiters. Right, we're splitting the work between the two. I got the modern algorithm on both of these. Actually, the release times are pretty close to each other. This is something I definitely want to talk about because the release times are very powerful, especially when you're trying to get loudness. We have low-end focus, which is another Ozone plugin, which does just that. It gives us focus to certain spectrum of the low frequencies. We have the M stereo expander. So I'm going to go into these more. I'm just giving you sort of an overview. This is our stereo EQ. You can see that I'm adding definitely a more substantial amount of low frequencies here, taking a little bit of the edge out, and then adding a little bit, like half a dB of this sort of kind of around that same range. It's about 600 hertz. Oh, excuse me. Okay, and then we have, let's keep moving here. We got Infinity EQ. Love Infinity EQ. So we got some mid-side EQ going on here, just to control some of the. Let's see what range we're looking at. So it looks like a little over 200 hertz. Yeah, 250. So that's around that warmth. So now I'm balancing that warmth, but just in the mid, not the sides, not stereo, but just in the middle of the stereo spectrum. And for those of you that are new to mid-side or have never used mid-side processing, we'll get to that in just a little bit here. Okay, and then we have, let's see, that was Infinity EQ, and then we probably have, there's mid-side compression, bringing some of that center impact into the mastering. More on that. No OTT today, no supercharger, and no tape machine. Those are all bypassed. So let's kind of start from. Now, I almost always start with my limiters. I mean, you see me doing all this detailed work in the drums and in the vocals, and some of that I do kind of do right out of the gate. Like I start and I hear inconsistencies, or I want to glue things together a little bit. I want to control certain frequencies. Like I do some of that obvious stuff very early on. But many times I sort of test the waters initially, and I just want to make things loud and just see what happens, right? Just get out the microscope and just start seeing what is going to pop through with the loudness. So that's one of my starting points normally. And the limiters are being tweaked all the way through to the end. So there's not like I just set it and then just like, all right, done. No. I mean, I am fine-tuning these things to try to avoid distortion, to get as much out of I can with the louder mastering. A lot of that stuff is being done with, just overall. It's evolving throughout the mastering. Now, I do want to just open the floor if there are any questions. Like, don't be afraid to ask. There's no question that's too beginner or, anything that's sort of out of line. I definitely want you all to have that opportunity if you want to take advantage of it. But so I have these two limiters. I normally start with the first limiter in the signal chain. And I do that because, as I bring this threshold down, the loudness is going to come up. It's going to hit the second limiter. And then, I'm almost immediately going to see gain reduction, and just the limiter is going to be reacting to the previous limiter, which is adding that loudness. So there's going to be a lot happening here. And then I end up doing things like maybe backing this off a little bit. Maybe trying to push this a little harder, maybe trying to push this a little harder. And you gotta play with it. It's like sitting there and just balancing two balls like on, a scale. and you're just trying to get it to be balanced. And it's like you're adding a pebble to try to make this side a little bit more even. You add, oh, you know what, that was too much. Let me try this pebble. It's a little bit smaller. And that's really just what you're doing. Looks like I got a question here. Let's see. Oh, what's the question here? We got a question about OTT. Yeah, I did mention OTT. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, OTT is it's powerful. Some cases it's too powerful, as you know. So I know Simon has a lot of experience. Probably I don't know if you worked with that before, Simon, but this is the Slate one. This is MOTT, which is sort of their. We'll take a look at it here once the graphic loads up. All right, so yeah, we have MOTT. It's actually derived from, there's 3 different versions of it. We have the original OTT, which is the preset off of Ableton's multiband compressor. And if you just go into like Ableton's stock plugins, here's a little history lesson for all of you. You go into Dynamics, multiband Dynamics, and there we go. There's the preset right there. OTT. So that's the original, and then they went ahead and the people that made Serum released a free version of OTT that you can all download and use yourselves if you don't have Ableton or if you don't have the Slate subscription. But anyway, back to the original question. When do we use OTT? So OTT is attitude. It's excitement. And that's when we use it, right? There's a certain type of attitude that comes with using OTT. There's a certain type of excitement that comes with using OTT, and you basically try it, and if it works, cool. If it doesn't, you don't. I have found that OTT tends to take away punch, and it tends to be more effective when we have something that is sort of abundantly warm and punchy. I have a video on the Colorm on YouTube about making sounds more exciting. And if you watch that video, you'll notice in there that I use it on, I think it's a synth, some type of like saw synth. And that's like a classic example. I mean, in EDM, OTT became sort of like this thing on both mastering and with synths because everything had to be hyper exciting. So when you had a synth that was in like Serum or something and just kind of preset or you know, they're building it from scratch, they need to add that just ultra excitement. OTT helps hype up the mid-range, because that's what it does. So with that as an artifact, as a negative artifact, I'll say, you also lose a lot of that punch. So when you put that on a master, you have to be ready to bypass it and listen and just make sure that you're getting out of it what you want to get out of it. It's definitely good when you're using OTT to take advantage of the mix wet dry. So, you know, if I'm using OTT in mastering or in mixing, you're probably going to see me doing a lot of this where I kind of like go to 100% and then pull it back to hear it without it. And then I just add enough to where it's like, okay, you know, I can hear that, right? In some cases, you need like an extreme amount, but it's rare. I think I find myself using somewhere between like 2% and 50%. So yeah, so there's no right or wrong answer to it, but generally it's like if you want excitement, OTT. But at the cost of potentially less punch. So it could be something that maybe you do by grouping all the instruments but your drums, or maybe all instruments, no drums, no bass, grouping all those together and then adding OTT and potentially doing it that way. Cool. So yeah, so limiting, not something that is sort of set it and forget it, definitely working that balancing that I'm talking about. Let's talk about the release time. This is actually a really powerful thing. So if I slow down the release time here, and I hope this keeps up here with my processor, bear with me. I'm gonna slow down the release time, and what you're gonna hear with the mastering is you're gonna hear everything get a little quieter and a little smoother. Okay.
Mira que ya yo lo presiento. Es una aventura y toca darle tiempo. Yeah. Y ahora es el momento para darlo todo y nadar en contra de la marea. Que si la mente titubea, que el man no le crea y se arme la pelea. Lo vea aunque no lo vea. No hay lugar en dudar because you say, hey, come back.
That's with a fast release time. You're slow.
We'll be okay, cause it's possible. Because you say, hey, come back on my way.
Let's go into the chorus.
We'll be okay, you're unstoppable.
Okay, I'm gonna jump to the big part
I
here.
just do believe that it's possible. And when I'm weak, you will fight for
Okay.
me. I just do
Faster
believe
release
you're
time.
unstoppable. You're unstoppable.
Slower.
You're
Faster.
unstoppable.
So whether you can hear that detail or not, and I apologize for the glitchiness, but basically what we're looking at here is when it's faster, yes, the master does get a little louder, but I find that it responds better to the drums and things like that. I feel it kind of get more forward, almost like it's more clear, more in my face, and that's just the result of a faster release time. Slower release time tends to be a little smoother. Can you get louder masters with slower release times? Absolutely. But you can find sometimes a nice balance between slow and fast. Now, if you're making something really loud and you try using faster release times, you might find that you get some distortion. So you want to try and find that point and this is that balancing act, right? It's just that point where you don't have distortion, but you get that impact and that forwardness that you're looking for. So yeah, and there might be a point where you're just like, yeah, I love the way it sounds, but it's a little bit distorted, and then you find you got to pull the threshold up, and you lose a little bit of volume at that point. So then you have to go to another processor to try to get it back, and that's just all part of the balancing act. So almost exactly the same kind of thing happens on the first limiter, where I'm dealing with this balancing act, playing with the release times, finding what works, cracking the code. It's really what it is. So low-end focus, pretty cool plugin. I actually just started using this a couple projects ago. Basically what I'm doing here is I'm using it in mid-side mode. So remember, you have your stereo field, you have left and right, but then you can also break the stereo image into middle. Let me go to... You can also break up the stereo field into middle and side. Middle and sides. So I'm using low-end focus to just give the lows a little bit more punch overall. So that's a combination of the kick, the bass, everything that's down there, right? But only in the middle, meaning not the wides. I'm leaving the wides alone. So I'm just focused here, and that's where the energy is for your kick and bass many times, at least most of the energy. So let's look at low-end focus really quick. I'm going to turn it off. And let's hear it. Actually, watch your ears. I'm gonna turn off this gain match here. So yeah, watch your ears. It's gonna get louder. I warned you. So let's go ahead and bring up low end focus. I just shut out. Just turned it off. Here we go. So let's go to the first chorus here.
I will rise and look past the light.
So I'm gonna turn it off.
To say I have a dream that you placed inside of me. I just do believe that it's possible. And when I'm weak, you will fight for me. I just do believe you're unstoppable. You're unstoppable.
So it's nothing night and day. Again, let's just make that clear, right? We're not trying to remix their track, but this is just a slight emphasis on that part of the frequency spectrum. Just a little bit, right? Just like we did a little bit on the drums, a little bit on the vocals, right? Everything is just a little bit here and there. So if I solo this, we'll hear exactly what it's affecting. Let's wait for it to go to the chorus here. That's it. That's the range that it's affecting. So I basically solo this, I go into mid-side mode, and then I bring the frequency down so that way I'm not enhancing anything that feels muddy or just kind of nasty. I look for a place that sounds a little sweeter, and that's what I focus on. And then I turn this up, right? And as I add punch into that limiter, we are going to hear things change. And I want to make sure, I'll crank it up, how much can I get away with? And then I'll bring it back and I'll just sort of settle on something. And again, as we go through the mastering process, all of these things are going to be fine-tuned. Oh, I'm getting a little distortion. Okay, well, let me try bringing back low-end focus a little bit. I need a little bit more punch. Let me try to push that up. Is it the only way that we can get that sort of feel of the low end to be more present? Not necessarily, right? We have EQ. If I bring up this EQ on the master bus here, look at what I'm adding here, right? This is also emphasizing those range of frequencies in stereo. This isn't a mid-side EQ, but it is adding to the feel of that section. Okay, so let's look at the M stereo expander. There we go, not the MS stereo expander. The M stereo expander, wonderful free plugin. I'm using the depth knob on this, which is just giving us that. It's giving us depth. Okay, so I'll play it off and on. So here's without it.
I will rise and look past the lies to say I have a dream that you placed inside of me. I choose to believe that it's possible. And when I'm weak, you will fight for me. I choose to believe you're unstoppable. You're unstoppable.
So if you're hearing it, it's sort of this like dimension that gets added to it. And this is one of my secret weapons with a lot of the stuff that I do. If someone says, I need to hear more depth in this, there you go. I mean, it has a depth knob on it, right? But it does add that dimension, and too much of it will just be crazy. Like here, I'll show you.
To say I have a dream that you placed inside of me. I choose to believe that it's possible. And when I'm weak, you will fight.
So yeah, so it gets like freakishly wide. There's like your head's swimming. Definitely not the focus of this song. But at 20% is honestly pretty high for that. So it just adds something. It doesn't mean that, again, the mix was awesome. I think once we get into the mastering, as I've been saying, it's like we compensate many times for the loudness, for some of the changes that we may have made. And it could have even been, and this happens many times, where when I'm listening to the pre-master, if the pre-master sounds bigger than my master, I have to do something about it. And a lot of the times that will be one of my solutions to adding that depth back because of the result of my limiting and the master processing. So let's look at, we brought up the stereo EQ. So a little bit of the edge taken off here. We got a little bit of that tone being added. These are subtle things. And then this low frequency boost is pretty substantial. That's 3 dB. That's bringing all that lowness forward. So if I go into the chorus,
I choose to believe you're unstoppable. You're unstoppable.
here's off.
I choose to believe you're unstoppable. You're unstoppable.
See, to me, that was just like a warm blanket. I love adding low frequencies when it's needed, right? You can't just do that to everything because it would make things super muddy, and that low energy hits the limiter harder, and then all of a sudden you're dealing with a more aggressive master than maybe you need. So balancing act. Okay. And it looks like I added some high end as well, just to give it some presence. I knew that from working with Simon, and I think on some of Dustin's stuff in the past, I may have just sort of realized that they do like some brighter sounds. So I noticed that I may have been making things a little too smooth. So I did add some of this 10K up here as a shelving curve. Now, why didn't I do it here? Because this doesn't have a frequency selection. I use this one because I have that ability to focus on 10K and bring it up. And that's about, a dB, less than a dB and a half. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. We're getting close to the end here. This is one of my sort of secret sauces. We'll talk about the infinity EQ here in a second, but this is the FGVU, which is Slate's model of, we'll say, a Fairchild or a Manley Verimu. It's one of those, but basically it is a compressor that allows us to do both stereo and mid-side. It has some edge to it just when you put it on, so it's not right for everything, but I do use it on a lot of stuff. So a couple things to note here. I have it in mid-side mode. I am adding gain to the input. I'm not bringing the compressor's threshold down, so I'm not trying to compress the middle. So again, mid-side, right? Middle, sides. So we're working with just the middle. The sides are being left untouched. So I'm turning up the gain on the input of the mid, which means we're bringing up the impact of the kick, the snare, the bass, the vocal. All that stuff is coming to the forefront. Now, I'm going to turn this up. This is our, let's see, we're at about 30% here. I'm going to turn this off first. I want you to hear what it sounds like without it on. You're going to hear the middle of the mix kind of fall back a little bit, and then when I turn it back on, it's going to come back, okay? So here's with it on.
I just don't believe you're unstoppable. You're unstoppable.
So here's on. This is off.
I just don't believe you're unstoppable. You're unstoppable.
It's on. I think that's more obvious than a lot of the other things that I've been showing you. But that's a 30% mix wet dry. So that is not 100%. If I bring it to 100%, it's going to be too much.
I just don't believe you're unstoppable. You're unstoppable.
That's where it's at. You can hear that my decision was a lot more tasteful than when I crank it up to 100%. It's just like bam, it comes to the forefront, and it's very different than what the sound that they want. It really takes away the size, because remember, the balance of middle and side, that is our width control. If we crank up a bunch of this, we lose that sense of width and depth. So we want a balance of that so that we get enough impact while still maintaining the relationship between the center impact and the wideness of the mix. Now, something to understand as well, I don't know if am I getting a lot of compression here? Let's see. We're looking at our gain reduction.
I just don't believe you're unstoppable.
No, the needle's barely moving. So it's like I'm getting a little bit of compression, but I'm getting more volume with a little bit of color, a little bit of compression, but just enough to where it works. 30%, that's what I'm using. Could have been 20, could have been 40, could have been 2. It's just I turn that knob and I do what feels right. So there's no formula for this, but that is a good way to get that center impact. And I do find, and I've said this in the past, that when we mix things big and pretty, which a lot of us do, we use wideners, we want things to be big, that center impact is many times what a lot of people's pre-masters are missing. Now, mid-side EQ, just like that concept, right? We're just doing a little bit here. It's like less than a dB. It's like listening and going, you know what? It sounds slightly muddy. Let me just pull some of that back. You'll barely hear it. This is actually on the sides. So we're rolling off the low frequencies from the sides. Okay? Stereo low frequencies are great. But once you get to a point, you're gonna make things weird with the limiter and with the just the overall impact of the mastering. You have to watch your stereo low information. So instead of just going mono, which is when it takes all of it and folds it together like a sandwich, which means you're taking all this information and you're bringing it into the middle, what we're doing is we're leaving everything in the middle, and we're actually balancing back this stuff. So we're not just doing this with it, which can kind of make things a little weird. We're taking the sides and we're balancing that information back, so that way it doesn't feel as out of control. Okay, and that might not be a concept that a lot of you are familiar with, and that's okay, because it's something that you you will be more familiar with, the more you ear train, the more you identify things like stereo bass, and the more you can kind of hear when things feel a little out of control versus tight and in control. But this sort of side processing does allow us to achieve that tightness in the low frequencies. And ultimately, in the louder mastering, the name of the game with a lot of this stuff is just controlling the energy, right? Controlling the harshness, controlling the muddiness, bringing that little bit back in those drums in the low end, just so that the master doesn't have as much of that woofy, kind of sound after all the limiting and everything else has been done. For all I know, that EQ on the drums could have been done at the very, very end of it. It could have been something that happened right after all the limiting and everything I just showed you was done. So yeah, so that's everything. And I know a lot of the times we do this stuff in real time, which I invite you all, if you haven't seen me do that before, you'll see more of my workflow in real time. But this at least gives you an idea of if you are doing stem mastering, some things that you can do to help balance, especially when you're dealing with multiple sections. I mean, lately we've been coming across a lot of these tracks where you have like rock, and then it goes into trap. Rock drums and trap drums, very, very different impact. So to split those up and treat those differently is definitely something that can help you sort of control the differences, but also give you some creative freedom. So that way when you do something to one track, it's not affecting everything downstream. We want to be able to have that independence to do one thing without it affecting everything else. So, splitting up the sections and treating your drums differently, whether you're mixing or mastering, is completely, at least in my opinion, something that's pretty powerful. And then you see this stuff here, and hopefully you get a better sense of like how these different frequencies do play into the big picture, how limiting and mid-side compression play into the big picture, and just maybe some of the psychology too, because we don't want to neglect what the artist's vision is. We want to embrace it. We want to understand that we all have our own opinions, and like if I gave this song to a different mastering engineer, you're going to get a different master. Whether Simon and Dustin and Ellie like that is completely, whether the stars align and that happens, cool. But I find that as part of the sort of my workflow to help embrace the artist's vision, listening to the pre-master, gain matching the master to the pre-master, so the loudness is sort of taken out of the equation, and just listening and trying to understand what they want and how you can achieve that in the mastering. So I hope all this helps you all kind of get a little bit better understanding of things. I do want to open the floor for some last minute questions before we wrap things up.